Yesterday, as the bell was ringing, we were on this particular slide right here. These are in other words, if you extract the brain out of these different animals, the first one is the bony fish, be like a perch or catfish or whatever you want like that. Next one is an amphibian, could be like a frog. Then we have reptiles. This could be, like a lizard or something like that. Bird could be any kind of bird that you would think of, and then a mammal. And each of these has different parts of the brain, but you'll notice that the parts of the brain are not all the same size. Yesterday, let's just go back a slide and look at what each of these different parts do. The olfactory has to do with the sense of smell, their ability to smell. Cerebrum controls voluntary muscles. For us, it's a large portion of it is where we store information, where you think intelligently about things. Optic lobe, that's the part of the brain that takes senses and converts them into images. Like what you see right now, your optic lobe is doing that for you. Cerebellum is the part of the brain where it takes these voluntary muscle activity, and it's sending a signal down, let's say, to some muscle, but they have to be timed to come out just right so that you behave in a coordinated fashion. Like if you were writing your name, then it would send impulses to the proper muscles at the right time so that you can actually write your name and make it look legible. And then the medulla oblongata transports those impulses down the spinal cord, where they'll end up going eventually to whatever area of the body that they were supposed to go. So you see what the different roles are of different portions of the brain. So in this, if you look at these, the largest part of the brain here is going to be number 3, which for the fish is the optic. In other words, seeing is very important for a fish to either prevent from being caught by their predator or to find food. They depend on eyesight heavily. You look at some of these others, like this is very large, and so this is number 2. Cerebrum has to do with, we said, voluntary muscle control. Birds fly, they have to control their wings. So that's being coordinated is really important, and avoiding running into things and landing on on a branch or something like that's very important for them. For a mammal, kind of the same thing. Intelligence is to avoid being caught, knowing where to look for prey, where are the ideal places to find food and things like that. So you kind of look at what's the large portions of that. We said that the cerebellum was like your part for coordination. For a mammal, with 4 legs, you have to coordinate the motion of all those legs so that you actually they're all making you go in the same direction. Whereas others, coordination isn't as important. Coordination's still pretty important for a bird, right? So that part's pretty good size. Now, notice for mammals, smell usually isn't high on their list of senses that they rely on. Like you don't rely on your sense of smell much at all. And with the sense of smell, for us as humans anyway, we get very accustomed to our smell. Could you describe how you smell right now? You don't even know, you don't even think you smell, right? But if somebody would smell you, that you have a unique odor. So smell's not very high on our list for survival. I smell that. Oh, that smells like trouble. Well, we say that figuratively, but we don't have much of a sense of smell. But for some animals, it's very important. Like for a fish, it looks like it must be pretty important, the sense of smell. Reptile, a lot of animals have smell, but as far as the other parts of the brain for the birds, smell isn't real high on their list. Eyesight is. Their optic, which is number 3, is pretty large too, because, like, for instance, like eagles and, well, let's say birds of prey, they rely heavily on being able to see their prey at great distances, flying way high, and they can see a little mouse scurrying down below. So the way God created each animal, you can tell what's important to that animal's survival by what parts of their brain is largest. Okay, so now let's talk about in that brain and how it functions. We have different kind of behaviors that we can exhibit, or an animal can exhibit. We have those behaviors that are inborn. We call it innate. Do you have to teach a newborn how to nurse? No, they just know how to do that. Okay? So that would be, this is something they have automatically at birth. You don't have to learn this at all. Are there some exceptions to that? Yes, for various reasons that might be. But for most babies, they know how to nurse. Okay? Reflexes, this is an automatic involuntary response to a stimulus. If I go up to Jazz and I do this, she's already starting to twitch her eyelids because she's afraid I might, but that's an automatic reflex. If something came out of the corner of her eye, she'd probably blink immediately. You don't have to be taught how to blink. Even a baby, believe it or not, if you bring your finger close to a baby's eye, it'll close it. It's not because they've been poked in the eye already and think, that didn't feel good. No, that's just something it's a reflex. Like for instance, the first time that you, let's say the first time you got poked with something sharp, how did you respond? Jerked your hand away, right? You actually jerked it away before you even thought that it hurt. It actually happens that quickly. You jerked it away, and then your brain says, oh, that hurt. Like you didn't think, oh, that hurts, I need to move it away. Not in that order, it's the other way around. It's a reflex. It doesn't even actually involve the brain quite often. Instinctive behavior, these are more elaborate responses to a stimulus that they can exhibit. Instinctive behavior, that there's something that they just do without being taught, or it's not even learned or anything like that. It's something they do. Example of one instinctive behavior that I learned about when I was taking a course in ornithology, which is study about birds and their behavior, is that if there is a bird that nests on the ground, they have usually a little depression, a little raised ridge around the outside, and if they lay eggs inside of it, and one of these eggs gets accidentally bumped out, with parents moving around, maybe knock one of the eggs out, they will take their beak and kind of roll it back into the nest. What they discovered is while this bird is in the process of starting to roll the egg back into the nest, if you suddenly snatch the egg away, they keep finishing it even though there is no egg. It's an elaborate instinctive behavior that once it's initiated will go all the way to finish, whether there's any reason to finish or not. So that would be like an instinctive kind of behavior. Now we have conditioned behavior. These are things that are learned. You learned why or why not to do something. This, as it says here, may or may not be induced by man. A lot of animals, you can teach them how to do certain things. They can learn how to do something. Like for instance, like pets who do tricks and stuff like that. They can learn to do these tricks. Quite often, reward works good. And some animals, like some dogs, for instance, they can get to a point where they don't have to be rewarded every time they're learning the praise of the master is plenty good. They aren't opposed to taking a treat, but they don't have to have a treat. but it's a learned behavior. Okay, then we have intelligent behavior. This is where you're using some kind of tool to do something. Like some of you right now are using a pencil as a tool to write down information, or some other animals might use a tool to, pry open something, as an example of that. But they're using a tool. One thing I saw is some birds that feed, for instance, like if they feed on clams or something like that, there was this one, it looked like a tall wading bird, kind of like a crane or maybe a stork type size. And what they often do is they'll take a clam and they'll take it over to the rocks, and they'll use their head and their neck, and they'll sling that clam down on the rocks to break it open so they can eat it. Well, one of those happened to be on a golf course and saw this white thing that looked like a clam, picked it up, it was a golf ball, picked it up and went over to the hard path that the golf carts went on, and would sling it down like this, and then it would bounce high up in the air. And at first I think it thought it was going to be food. Then it discovered this is fun. So then they'd race after the golf ball and bring it back to the path again, and then sling it down on there, and then it would go shooting off somewhere else. They were just having fun, But it started out as using the rocks as a tool, but then to break open something, and then it kind of wandered off into something else. Okay, and they're problem solving. It's surprising how some animals are pretty good at problem solving. You've probably seen some, like I've seen many times, of dogs that have figured out how to get a door open. Especially if you have a door that has a latch like that kind, where you have a handle on it. They figured out how to get out. They've learned how to problem solve. Okay, I want to get out, and then I know the door has something to do with it, and it has a handle on it, and that's what's keeping me from getting out. So if I can manipulate that handle, I'm going to get out. That's their reasoning process. So that is problem solving. So some animals are very good at problem solving, and others not so good. And then communication. We always think that communication involves only saying words, but you guys communicate with each other without saying anything sometimes, right? It's that look that you give to each other, or whatever. Some expression that you make. It already means something to somebody else. You're communicating. Some animals, they do it just with making different kind of sounds, that communicates. I know that when I was growing up, we lived, in high school, we lived in Oklahoma, and during the summer, we didn't have air conditioning upstairs, and so it get kind of warm in the evenings when you'd go to bed, and so we'd open up all the windows wide open. Well, then you'd hear the coyotes out there, and they're calling to each other, communicating, I don't know what, maybe we're all good over here, where are you at, those kind of things. They would howl. At first, when you hear it for the first time, not having lived there, it was kind of spooky at first, but then after a while, you got to the point where you realize there's nothing harmful about that, there's nothing to be afraid of, and it's just kind of entertaining to listen to them communicate with each other. Even whales communicate with each other with their groans and stuff like that. If you've ever heard about that. And the interesting thing about whales is they can communicate over huge distances, like hundreds of miles, because that sound travels well. That frequency travels well through the water. I think they read somewhere they think that sometimes they can communicate up to a distance of maybe 1,000 miles with other whales. Well, that is a great distance away. Okay, so now let's go to the next section there that has to do with classifications. We kind of talked about these a little bit at the beginning briefly, and then this will be kind of an overview again, and then we'll go on more in detail. Okay, we have one class that's called Agnatha, and these are the hagfish or the lamprey eel. The lamprey eel will fasten itself to the side of a fish right along. It has a kind of like a sucker type mouth with some really raspy teeth on the inside that will chew through the scales and into the tissue of the fish and derive its nourishment that way. So it's like a parasite. It's not good for the fish. Then we have chondrichthyes, which we've talked about before. The chondra, this part right here, has to do with cartilage, fish. So those would be like your sharks and rays, like manta rays would also fit in there, stingray. Then we have osteichthyes, and osteichthyes are the bony fish. So if you've ever eaten fish, this is the kind you eat. Most people don't eat the other kind. Not many people eat sharks, but some people do. You have the bony fish, so any fish that you've probably eaten it would belong to that class of vertebrate. Okay, so let's go through now the osteichthyes. Talk about, first of all, their support. How is their body supported? And we know that if you've ever seen fish or eaten fish, you know they have a skeleton. It's a bony skeleton. The parts of the skeleton, they also have what would correspond to our chest, the pectoral girdle, and the part that would correspond to our hips would be their pelvic girdle. And then they usually have fins attached to those for helping them more to control small movement, not big movement. This is the one that usually propels a fish through the water, or if you're trying to fight a fish, if you're trying to land a fish, that's the one that you're working against. That's their strongest muscle that they have. They, as I said, they use their fins for kind of like fine movement, and these fins here will help them go straight. And then this is the one that propels them forward. If they flip them really fast back and forth, they can propel themselves forward pretty fast. Okay? They also, their movement is controlled by muscles. That's the part you eat, actually, is the muscles of the fish. And then they also have a swim bladder that keeps them upright. If you've ever had fish at home, maybe in an aquarium, and they're sick, you often see them kind of tipped over on their side. And quite often, their swim bladder is not properly inflated, and so they kind of flip over on the side. It's usually, when the swim bladder's not right, the fish is not right, usually. They also have scales, and when you look at the scales, you can remember when we looked at the clams, they had those little like growth rings. Scales on a fish also have little growth rings too. So you can kind of tell a little bit about how old a fish is by looking at the scales. Now, we always talk about fish being slimy, right? A lot of them are way more slimy than others, but that is mucus. It's for making their body surface smoother for moving through the water, but it's also for absorbing chemicals out of their environment and sensing it, and also for their own protection. Okay? And then they have, if you notice, a lot of fish have different colors. Well, you're either going to have to stand in the back, or I'm going to have to load on with my squirt gun. Okay, so your choice. Avoid being shot often, or they have different colors on the skin, and they're called by the special cells that have these pigments inside of it, and they can be, some fish are very brightly colored, some are just really drab. It kind of depends on Like for instance, if you're a fish that serves as food for other fish, you're probably going to want to blend into your environment so you aren't easily spotted. You don't want to be bright colored. Now, often the brightest colored fish are often in the ocean, and they travel in schools. That's kind of their form of protection. As far as digestion, they do have a mouth and they have teeth, but their teeth are not for chewing. It's only to grasp their prey and help to swallow them. The teeth are often pointed backwards so that when the fish, if they're swallowing another fish, let's say, with the fish is trying to move backward, it hooks on that tooth and prevents them from going backwards. So their teeth are not for chewing, it's just to help them grasp a prey to the point where they can swallow it. Now they have the whole alimentary canal, which is made up of all the typical parts. They have a throat, but their throat is quite flexible. They can swallow. It's amazing how big a fish can be swallowed by a larger fish. Quite often when we're cleaning fish after being on a day's fishing, you would sometimes find some of like we were fishing for fish that were a lot bigger, like a northern pike, but you would sometimes have a fish in there that was like over half as long as the fish that actually swallowed it. So they can their throat is large, so they can swallow it. Other animals have big throats too, that they can swallow large prey. We don't have that. We have kind of a small throat. We don't swallow anything big. But snakes, for instance, they have and they also have a special kind of jaw that allows it to open up their mouth huge, and their throat is pretty flexible. They can swallow some pretty large animals, sometimes bigger around than they are. You wonder how can they do that? Well, they can stretch. Okay, they have an esophagus. They have a stomach. This is where we would typically, on a fish, would find the other fish that had been swallowed by it. And then they have intestines. So in other words, they have kind of the whole system that we have. Then they also have some other organs that help with digestion. With that, they have a pyloric cecum, which is located right here. They have a liver. It functions much the same way as our liver. They also have a gallbladder, like we do. Gallbladder just stores the bile that's produced by the liver to help with digestion, particularly with one thing is like with fats, fatty tissue, fatty foods. You need bile to be able to digest it. Same thing with the fish. They have a gallbladder. They have a pancreas. So we think that humans have pancreases. No, fish even have a pancreas to regulate blood sugar in their body. When it comes to respiration, they have gills. The part that you see on a fish, that they open and they close, open and close, that's called the operculum. Okay, that's the part that they open up to have water move out and then close up. They also often use the floor of their mouth to help kind of pump. They open it up, fill their mouth with water, and then close, and then they can raise the floor of their mouth, and the water goes out through the gills. When the operculum is open, and they'll close the operculum, and do this thing all over it. So they can kind of pump water across their gills, even though they're not moving forward. Now, sharks don't have that ability, or a lot of them don't. Let's see, some of them do. Okay, they have a closed circulatory system. What does that mean again? You have to have what three things to have a closed circulatory system, in addition to the heart, let's say that. What are the three things? Okay, have to have veins. Capillaries. And arteries, okay? So that's the parts that they have. The part that's different about a fish is our heart is a four-chambered heart. Blood comes into an atrium, and then it is pumped in a short little distance into the ventricle. The ventricle pumps the blood out to the lungs for us, and then it comes back from the lungs back to the heart again, to another atrium, and then it goes down into the ventricle where it's pumped out to the whole rest of the body. Where they don't have that. They just have an atrium and a ventricle, and the blood that's getting oxygen and the blood that's low in oxygen gets mixed. So it's not as efficient a system as what we have. We have people who can run a marathon. They can run for like 4 hours. My daughter-in-law runs marathons, and she'll run for almost 4 hours. A fish can't fight you for 4 hours typically. It usually doesn't last anywhere near that long because their blood is mixed, because they only have two chambers in there, atrium and ventricle. And the parts, here's their heart, but everywhere it goes has to have arteries and veins and capillaries, wherever it happens to go. So there's your ventricle, there's your atrium. They have gills that oxygenates the blood. So the blood probably up in here is going to be more rich in oxygen, but back over here, the part that's pushing them forward is the tail. Those muscles may not have as rich a supply of oxygen as the other half of the body, just because it's being mixed. So those are all the places where the blood's got to flow for it to function properly. Now, we really already have talked a little bit about this. The nervous system of a fish, they have a brain. It's right between the eyes. And they have a spinal cord going down we said it's dorsal, remember? It has to be on the top side, not the bottom side. And you look at the parts of the brain that are large, and you can see what's important to their survival. They have a pretty good size olfactory lobe. That's the sense of smell. Like, for instance, salmon need to be able to get back to their spawning rivers, and they know what the river smells like. They still remember it from when they left there many years ago. So they have to know how it smells. They have an optic lobe, so sight is very important to avoid being caught by their predator and also to catch their own prey. It's very important for them to be able to see. And then they have to be coordinated, so they have the cerebellum that coordinates all that activity. So you can kind of see what's important. But as far as the cerebrum, can you teach a goldfish to do tricks? Right? They don't have much of a brain for that part, so that's not really going to be something you're going to be able to do with them. You have to have a part of a brain that's capable of giving that organism that ability. They have large optic nerve, powerful sense of smell. Now, along the side of a fish, you often see this kind of like a line. I don't know if some of you are far enough in your notes. What's the function of the lateral line? What's the function of the lateral line? The line actually are like a whole series of little pits along there where the senses are. Did anybody find it yet? This is how it senses its environment. Like if the current is flowing by them, changes in the river and things like that. That's how they sense it with that. Since they don't, they don't use their tongue for things like that. Their tongue is only to help push food down the throat. It doesn't have much other purpose than that. So that's how they sense their, what's changing in their environment. Excretion, they have kidneys, they have a bladder, now notice that this word right here, uro, has to do with the kidney part. In other words, getting rid of urine. And the genital part has to do with the sex organs. So they have one common tube for both. You know, for carrying eggs or carrying sperm or whatever, you know, if it's a male or female, and urine, all come out the same opening. In humans, we have part of that's kind of separated. They have external fertilization, which means that mother fish, the female fish, is going to lay eggs, and then the male will swim over where the eggs have been deposited and release sperm over the eggs. So this fertilization happens outside of either fish's body. And then once the egg is fertilized, it'll grow into another little baby fish eventually. So when the female does that, we say it's spawning. Okay? When a female does that, it's spawning. It's laying her eggs. And the males, when they release sperm, it's milked. And most of them are oviparous, which means they hatch from an egg. Okay, so here's that jawless fish that I was talking about that had these little teeth on the inside that suck on the side of usually a pretty good, depending on how big it is, it'll pick a fish that's bigger still and latch onto it. Often it latches onto maybe right behind the gills, about in that area is where they'll often latch onto that fish, and they'll just ride along with that fish, and the fish will be providing a lot of food for them. So the two kinds that do that, one's called a lamprey eel, and the other one's just called a hagfish. They're similar. Okay, so then that's all we're going to talk about that particular class. Then we have the chondrichthyes. These are the ones that have a cartilage body. Skeleton, sorry. That would be like the sharks and all the different kind of rays, like the stingray, the manta ray, fit into this category. If you've been to the Henry Dorley Zoo, you see those kind of swooping over the tunnel that when you go to visit. You're dismissed.